Ares, the god of war, was actually very much disliked by the other gods. However, at the same time, they accepted him because they understood that his energy was essential to the whole. The reason that they disliked him was because of his very chaotic and aggressive nature, and basically whenever he showed up, he kind of brought destruction with him. However, what makes Ares particularly fascinating is that paradox of passion and persistence with his violence and chaotic nature at the same time. He has nothing to do about being morally right. So there is a particular part of his myth, or rather the lack of it, that I find incredibly intriguing. So Ares really helps us understand but also harness our inner warrior, so really understanding what is important to us and what are we ready to fight for. Hello and welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Jada. In this series, we're diving into the different archetypes of Greek mythology as a way for self-discovery and really understanding ourselves better. If you haven't watched the introduction video, I'm going to link it up above and down below so you can have a look at it. It will give you a better understanding on what this series is about. Also, I'm going to link the playlist down below so you can watch the other gods as well. As mentioned in the beginning, he was never portrayed in a very positive light by the Greek, but this has also to do with the Greeks' aversion towards violence. So it was also reflected in how much Ares was disliked. So unlike many other Olympian gods like Zeus or Poseidon, where their tales are full of dominance and, forcing themselves onto women especially, Ares' myth kind of lacks that part, like it's never really mentioned. While his story tells a lot about destruction and violence and even murder, but it's never about violence towards women. It never really gets mentioned, which makes it so interesting given the fact that he is the god of war and therefore represents violence. So again, it's not necessarily mentioned that he protected women or that he holds them in high standards and kind of try to defend them. It's rather the lack of it not happening that really stands out. So his aggression and his violent nature was usually channeled in a different way, which is also shown in the ongoing affair that he had with Aphrodite. However, even in that myth, it's always mentioned that it was consensual. His protective side actually even emerges when one of his daughters gets assaulted by one of Poseidon's sons, and out of revenge, he was like, absolutely not, and basically killed Poseidon's son. So here too, it shows that the act itself is not necessarily noble, like, murdering someone is not something nice, but it came from a place of personal justice on one side, but also from personal belief on fighting for what you believe in. It's like, you're not going to do that to my daughter. So it really is the part of us that is about standing up for what we believe in, fighting for what we care about. Also, a really interesting interpretation that we can get out of this is by his lack of forcing himself onto women. So it kind of highlights that it's not anger that leads to exploiting someone or something else, but rather arrogance and ego that are the true motivators of taking advantage of someone else. Because his aggression was directed towards what he believed to be important and not about dominating someone else. So he shows us that our convictions can also be aligned with respect, like we can fight for what we believe in without having to take advantage of someone else. Regardless of that, we should not forget the fact that he was the god of war, so he did bring a lot of destruction with him. And that part of his myth basically just really highlights what can happen if we are not in control of ourselves, if we allow ourselves to run wild, basically. So we bring a lot of destruction with us as well, which at the end doesn't serve us either. I already mentioned Ares and Aphrodite's love affair and it being very consensual, and it's also always described as very intense and passionate. Now, while Aphrodite represents our ability to indulge in that pleasure, Ares represents the part to pursue our pleasures and to go after our passions. Basically, going actively after what he wants without hesitation. At the same time, this part also shows us what can happen if we follow our desires without checking ourselves, without, taking a moment to think things through, because his relationship or his affair with Aphrodite was super scandalous and created a lot of ruckus on Mount Olympus, basically because he couldn't keep his passions in check. This fact is also highlighted by the part where he decided to fight for the Trojans and not for the Greeks, and he all did it because Aphrodite asked him to. So his passion for Aphrodite basically fueled his decision on which side he would pick. So he was kind of also blinded by his passion. So again, here he shows us like the extreme determination that we can build up for what we believe in and what we are passionate about, but also the negative consequences if we don't take that moment of pause and reflect and check ourselves. Another really, really interesting part about his myth is that he had to face a lot of defeats. So when you think of the god of war, you would think, he's the victorious one in every battle, but it was actually far from that. He had to endure a lot of defeats, especially with Athena, his sister, some battles that he had with Heracles. He was also very much humiliated by Hephaestus, Aphrodite's husband, because Hephaestus created a net that would trap the lovers and basically display them in front of all the other gods. However, you should not think that Ares was weak because of that. Actually, it highlights one of his main energy and characteristics, and that is that of resilience. So no matter how many times he got defeated, he would always get back up again. It's the part in ourselves that refuses to accept failures or setbacks. It's also the part of us that shows a very sound ego in terms of confidence, being able to believe in ourselves regardless of the challenge or setbacks that we might face, or even our ability to not perceive a failure as a failure. However, on the other side again, he can also be the one who keeps doing the same thing over and over again without getting any results. So if we again go blindly into that energy, we might not come very far either, because it also needs that calm, strategic part of ourselves and not just the one that was able to push through. So this is where his sister Athena really comes into play, who was very level-headed, very logical, thought things through, while Ares is about going after it, pushing through, getting up again, not allowing something or someone to defeat us. So balanced Ares really shows himself in our resilience, our ability to get back up, to rise again after a failure. He also really represents our ability to take action, to have those confrontations that we need to have, or tackle that difficult task, but also about pursuing what is really important to us. Another example of a balanced Ares is having a strong ego in terms of believing in ourselves, having self-confidence, and being able to pursue our passions without the fear of judgments or what others might think of us. An overactive Ares, on the other hand, is someone who acts before he thinks, who wastes energy because he kind of starts running before even thinking things through if this is even the right direction to go to. It also leads to unnecessary conflict and even to negative consequences that we could have avoided if we would have just taken the time to think things through. An overactive Ares can also show as being very self-centered, only caring about what we care about, only caring about our own passions, our own desires, our own goals, and not caring about anyone else anymore. Another noticeable characteristic of an overactive Ares is a lack of self-control. So being easily triggered and having an outburst of anger, like someone says something to you and you immediately yell at them, because you don't have the self-restraint or the level of self-reflection to realize that it's maybe not even personal. So it can actually show as a verbally aggression, but even as a physical aggression. A suppressed Ares is someone that avoids confrontation, that doesn't want to upset anyone else and is scared that someone might be upset with them, so they really fear what the other person might think of them, which then can lead to missed opportunities out of fear. A suppressed Ares is also someone who can be easily influenced, where the opinion of someone else might actually decide the approach or the direction that we might take, because we don't have enough self-confidence to stand up for ourselves. Another characteristic will be to give up. So another tendency that we might have with a suppressed Aries is that every failure or every obstacle that we encounter, we might perceive as a defeat, as, okay, I'm gonna give up because it's not working. It can also show up as denial, where we deny our passions and our goals. So because we deny them, we have like an excuse to not go after what we really want. Boxers are actually a great real-life example of what an Aries archetype looks like. And it's not necessarily about the physical violence, even though it does display that energy, that tenacity to keep going. But it's really about getting back up again. Like, no matter how many times they get knocked out, they always raise up again. So it's really that energy that is kind of beautifully displayed in terms of boxing, in representing the Aries archetype. So if you have a tendency to act out on Aries, one thing that you can do is start practicing self-restraint. Simply by pausing before acting, taking that time to reflect and direct your energy with intention instead with just impulsively. The important thing to keep in mind, it's not about bottling things up or suppressing our emotions. It's about controlling our emotion instead of being controlled by them. Another really great antidote when it comes to an overactive Aries is curiosity, because curiosity gives us that moment of pause. If you tap into that energy of that feeling of curiosity, you by default have to pause, because you're getting into that state of inquiring, of trying to figure things out. For example, if someone says something that really makes you angry, and instead of just blindly reacting to it, you take that moment to become curious. For example, I wonder why he said that, or I wonder why I'm reacting to that. It gives you really that pause. It takes out that impulsive reaction and allows you to reflect on what is happening and the approach that you really want to take instead of just leashing out. So what can you do if, on the other hand, your Aries has a tendency to be suppressed? A really great way to strengthen Aries is through physical activities. Things like martial arts, dancing, or any sort of sports, it not just strengthens our body, which Aries very much represents as well, but it also strengthens our ego, because we are becoming good at something, we're building confidence in something that we do. So a great way to also strengthen Aries is by doing, not thinking, not planning, by actually doing things. Doing things that are outside of your comfort zone, raising your hand, deciding to take on a project. It's about that initiative, energy, about doing, because the more confident we become, the more resilient we become. So when we then face a defeat, we are not defeated by it anymore. We just get up again and keep going. And with time, we really learn to not care about what other people think of us. So Aries really teaches us to go after our passions, build a strong and healthy ego, to stand up for what we believe in. So how do you feel about Aries? Is he the part of you that tends to jump head on into things without thinking about them, or even escalates conflicts because he doesn't have any control over himself? Or could it even be that you avoid challenges altogether because you're scared to actually face them? You might also want to watch the video on Athena if you haven't yet, which represents another part of the warrior, which is much more calculated and level-headed and strategic thinking, and not as impulsive and passionate as Aries. Otherwise, this is it for the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you in the next one.